Hello and welcome to this CGTN live stream from Paris. My name is Bryan Pirolli with CGTN, and thank you for joining us, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, Weibo, YouTube, or the CGTN app. So today, Parisians are waking up to a very different sight than they had seen yesterday. In the evening yesterday, on April 15th, a fire broke out here at the church that you're looking at, the Cathedral of Notre-Dame. So, as smoke and fire raged through the night, Paris's fire brigade, the pompiers, were able to fight the fire and preserve the building. So what you see there, it is actually intact. However, a large portion of the building, of the church, including its roof and its iconic steeple, which soared over the skyline of Paris, have all been destroyed, consumed by the flames. It's a tragedy that many Parisians and French people feel in their hearts, but also the international community has also responded to this event, sharing their thoughts and their condolences with the Parisians. We saw last night an outpouring of support on Twitter by people like Barack and Michelle Obama, former President and First Lady of the United States. Even former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton weighed in, and cathedrals and churches and religious communities around the world shared their thoughts with Paris's Notre-Dame. Even St. Paul's Cathedral in London tweeted that our thoughts and prayers are with all those affected by the devastating fire at Notre-Dame Cathedral, Paris, particularly in this time of Holy Week. Now, this morning, as we can see, the fire and smoke have all dissipated. The pompiers, the firemen, have successfully put out the fire. But what we see, the shell of the building that's left, that's standing in front of us, is it's certainly altered. Now, we see a whole lot of scaffolding on the building currently. That is not put up because of the fire. That is actually scaffolding that was put up recently as part of a €6 million renovation project for the roof and the steeple. So, of course, last night when the steeple did fall, it became an image that a lot of the newspapers and websites this morning published to really sum up this event. And, of course, that renovation is going to turn into a much more expensive, not just renovation, but total reconstruction of the church and its roof, which was built out of timber. So, for the moment, looking at the church, it seems like it is in not the best shape ever, but certainly still standing. You see the flying buttresses, the very iconic Gothic structural support system that was created to allow the French to build such a big church. They are still standing, and they are still holding up the walls of the cathedral. And most importantly, the two bell towers at the front of the church are still standing as well. Authorities had a lot of concerns last night that the fire would spread and heat the rock and heat the stones and actually end up destroying the bell towers, which would be unbelievably irreplaceable. But fortunately, the structure is still there, and there is still hope that the cathedral will be able to be rebuilt in the future. Now, that is not to say it will be rebuilt exactly as it looked before, because some of the interior elements were lost forever, and others were still not sure. The church, which was built in the Middle Ages, it's 856 years old this year. It featured some of the original elements, including some stained glass windows and a very famous and enormous pipe organ, which wasn't original to the first structure, but was put in later. And we're not sure yet how many of these structures are still intact and how many were destroyed. There were some people on Twitter saying that the famous, iconic rose windows, at least one of them, did survive the fire, but other reports have not yet confirmed that. Now, we're waiting for people, obviously, to get inside the church and to assess the damage for more information to come out. And you can see there right now on the south tower, the one on the left, there are some people up top assessing the situation, but it's still early in Paris, just after 8 o'clock, at 8:30 actually. So we will know more as the authorities get inside to check it out and to give us a more comprehensive report. So it was a very emotional and charged evening for the Parisians and the French, because Notre Dame it's such an important part of Parisian culture. It sits on the Île de la Cité. It's the island in the middle of the River Seine, and it's the central part of Paris. There is actually a plaque just out front of this building where all of the measurements for streets and roads and distances in Paris are measured from. So it's a building that everybody in Paris knows, that everybody associates with either tourism or religion or some special event. It's part of the Parisian vernacular. Unlike other famous buildings like the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, this was really a building where anybody could have entered. Anybody could have gone and visit. It was free to walk into and to appreciate, and has been so for 856 years. So to see it engulfed in flames was certainly something that was very emotional and very painful for so many Parisians. And as many reported throughout the night, it felt like they were having their hearts ripped out. We all felt like we were gutted a bit. So it is at least reassuring this morning to be looking at the church with no more smoke and no more flames engulfing it, and to see that despite all of this hardship and despite all of this event, it is still standing. Now, what's important to note is that this is not the first time that Notre Dame has suffered any sort of hardship or any sort of abuse. Back to the 16th century, during the religious wars, the church was sometimes attacked, and structures inside of it, maybe statues, were damaged or destroyed, and especially during the French Revolution, when the revolutionaries turned against the church as a whole, the cathedral became a temple of reason, and many of the icons and statues and paintings inside were destroyed as well. In fact, there's a panel of kings on the front end of the church that were not damaged in the fire, but during the French Revolution, all of their heads were symbolically chopped off because the revolutionaries believed that they depicted kings of France. They ended up actually depicting kings from the Bible, from the book of Judah, but it's neither here nor there. It still shows that the church was a victim at certain points in its history. Now, in the 19th century, there were extensive renovations to the church, which at that time was in such bad shape that it was actually slated to be destroyed. It was only thanks to a novel penned by a famous author at the time, Victor Hugo, that the church was saved. He wrote a book, which in English is known as The Hunchback of Notre-Dame, which is a book and or film that we all recognize about a hunchback that lived in the tower. But in French, the title is Notre-Dame de Paris, and the central character is actually the church. And he wrote this because when he looked at the church and realized that it was going to be destroyed, he was really moved and scared about losing such an important part of French patrimony. So the book worked as a sort of propaganda to secure the church and to convince the authorities not to destroy it, but, in fact, to renovate it. So it was during these renovations in the middle to the end of the 19th century that the spire that we saw fall last night was actually built. Tons of lead and wood were used to build this structure, which was lined with copper statues of saints and other religious figures. Fortunately, over the past few weeks, the renovations of the church that we're undergoing saw these statues removed. So while the spire itself did burn and fall last night, the statues around it are all that remain of this structure, but they are preserved and may one day be put back, although it's certainly too soon to tell. The damage, as I said, we will know more soon about exactly how bad, how much of a toll the fire took on the church. So if you're joining us again, my name is Bryan Pirolli, and we are live streaming here on CGTN in Paris. If you're joining us on Twitter, Facebook, Weibo, YouTube, or CGTN's app, welcome. Paris is waking up this morning to a church that has been quite literally gutted after a horrendous fire last night. Now, the images are gracing the pages of all the newspapers in France and around the world today, and social media is clearly abuzz with condolences and thoughts that are being shared with the French. Fortunately, looking at these images, as sort of depressing as they are, there are some silver linings to note. For example, nobody was critically injured, as we know of so far, during the event. Some 400 to 500 firefighters were engaged in battling the fire, and so far only one was reported injured. So this is a positive, sort of a positive part that we need to focus on as well. And many of the artifacts and relics inside the church, inside the cathedral, they were able to be removed before they were engulfed by flames. So, for example, the church for many centuries has housed relics, including a portion of the crown of thorns that Jesus Christ was supposed to have worn, and a part of the cross that he was allegedly nailed to. So these relics, these religious relics, which are very important to the Catholic faith, were preserved and moved to safety before the fire could reach them. The same can't be said for many of the wooden structures inside, including the roof. The roof was a marvel of architecture when it was put up, and it was created from about an estimated 13,000 trees that were collected from a nearby forest back in the 11 and 1200s. And this wood was at the time one of the biggest structures in Paris, and today all that's left of it likely is ashes, because it was like a tinderbox for this fire. And so while replacing that in the future, we're not quite sure yet, obviously, what the plans are, but President Emmanuel Macron of France has committed to doing whatever is necessary to rebuild the church. So as long as this structure remains stable and viable in its current state, we can expect in the future, we're not sure how far into the future, but in the future, the church will be restored to maybe not its former glory, but to some form of it. Now, France has seen other churches in the past burn, some to the ground, some not. Very famously in the Champagne region, which we associate, of course, with the bubbly alcoholic drink, there is a very famous cathedral in the town, the city of Reims, that also burned back during World War I in a very similar way. Now, this church was renovated afterwards and restored, but it took nearly 20 years for the church just to be reopened to the public. But still today there is ongoing work to restore the church, to stabilize the building, and to replace many of the decorations that were lost. So looking at Notre-Dame today, if in fact it really is entirely gutted on the inside, as some of the early photos would suggest, we can probably expect years and years of renovations before it resembles anything like it did before. And it's interesting to note that this fire, the cause has not yet been identified, but there where you see the scaffolding in the image, these scaffoldings were part of the €6 million renovation to the steeple that has since collapsed during the fire. So there are no estimates yet as to how much renovations could possibly cost for this, for Notre-Dame to redo it. So far, one billionaire, François-Henri Pinault, the chairman and CEO of international luxury group Kering, has pledged €100 million towards rebuilding the church. As well, President Emmanuel Macron has said that we will start fundraising today, the day after the fire, as well as an outpouring of support from some websites, some Kickstarters and other online funding campaigns, which have already begun to collect hundreds and in some cases even thousands of dollars and euros to rebuild the church. But of course, we cannot possibly begin to estimate how long that will take. We're still waiting to find out the extent of the damage. So while the surveyors go in today and tomorrow and over the coming weeks, we'll find out more about what was really lost during this devastating fire. For example, the organ, one of the most famous pipe organs in the world, we're not sure yet if it actually survived. It wasn't directly underneath the roof, which was burning. It was actually located closer to the two towers, which survived the fire, but that's not to say that the heat from the fire or flames didn't reach it. As well, the church is known for its 3 rose windows. These are 3 enormous circular stained glass windows that allow light to flood into the church. We're not sure yet if they've survived, although some early reports on Twitter cite firefighters as having said that they were destroyed, but some people do say that at least the north window may still be intact. And these are windows that date back to the 1200s. So to lose them, they would be parts of this heritage, parts of this patrimony that would be simply irreplaceable. So everybody's hoping for the best outcome from this terrible situation, that as much has survived the fire as possible. But it's clear just looking at this section of the church, the roof and the steeple that was atop it are totally and entirely gone. There might be parts of the roof left, some beams towards the west end of the church, closer to the two towers, but we're not sure yet. As well, we can imagine that many of the stained glass windows, both original and newer portions, were destroyed during the fire, but we'll know more as the day wears on. So if you're joining us here on CGTN's live stream, we are in Paris, taking a look at the aftermath of the fire that consumed Notre-Dame de Paris, the cathedral in the center of Paris. This is a church, a Catholic cathedral, which is located on Ile de la Cité in the heart of Paris, on the island settled in the middle of the Seine River. This is a symbolic place in Paris, not just because of this impressive church, but because the Ile de la Cité is quite literally where Paris began. The earliest civilizations in the area settled on this island and built their first houses of worship here. Later, when the Romans came and conquered the region, they also placed a temple on the very site where Notre Dame sits today. It was later replaced by a Christian church, which itself was replaced in the 1100s by Notre Dame, the cathedral that we all know today. It's one of the earliest and best preserved examples of Gothic architecture. The Gothic architecture includes many different features, including the flying buttresses that you see, the sort of arms holding up the walls of the church, most of which seem to have survived the fire. Gothic architecture also involves pointed arches, which you see surrounding the stained glass windows. Other notable portions of Gothic architecture include the gargoyles, which functioned as medieval gutters, which should have survived the fire because most of them are located on the outside of the church. But again, we will see what kind of damage was done as the days and weeks go on. Now, Notre Dame, over the centuries, has played host to many historic events. It has been the place where Napoleon Bonaparte was crowned emperor of the First French Empire in the early 1800s. It's also the church where state funerals are often held. It's also where the celebration for the liberation of Paris was held after World War II. It's a famous tourist destination for people around the world, not just the French, and it's one of the most visited monuments, welcoming more tourists than even the famed Eiffel Tower. To see it burn last night and to watch this plume of smoke go up as this historic building simply crumbled, it sort of tugged at the heartstrings of not just the Parisians, not just the French, but of people around the world. It was difficult to watch, but the support that came from around the world, and that will continue to come from around the world, will hopefully help the Parisians heal, and will help this church to rebuild in the coming years. So if you're joining us again one more time, my name is Bryan Pirolli from CGTN, and we're here in Paris, taking a look at the Cathedral of Notre-Dame, which suffered quite possibly its worst destruction last night at the hands of a fire. So what you're looking at now is actually the back of the church. Most image searches for Notre-Dame de Paris will show you the two towers, which you see in the background. Those towers house all of the bells that sometimes ring over Paris, including the famous Emmanuel bell. Fortunately, as far as we can tell, the towers and the bells have not been damaged and have not been compromised after this fire. There was a moment last night during the fire, during the blaze, where authorities said they might not be able to save the structure, and the towers might very well fall. So it's with a bittersweet happiness this morning that Parisians awake to find that the church is still intact, the bell towers are still standing, and there is still hope for this great monument. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it welcomes tourists to visit it daily, including going up the famous bell towers to get a closer look at the bells and to get a unique bird's eye view of Paris. Clearly, for the foreseeable future, the church will be closed to visitors as renovations and restorations and rebuilding will begin in the future. Although at the moment, no details are out there to know exactly how or when the restoration will take place, it can be expected that it will cost many millions, if not billions, of euros just to get the church back into working order. Previously, over the past few weeks, renovation projects on the roof and the steeple were addressing some of the many issues that the structure faced. Maybe the casual tourist might not notice walking around Notre Dame, but there are many parts of it that are in disrepair. From broken gargoyles and crumbling stones to we have some comments here. So we have some people commenting that they were indeed happy to visit the church before the fire happened, although hopefully in the future people will still be able to visit it again. And we are indeed happy for the firefighters who risked their lives in safety to preserve the church and to fight that fire. Notre-Dame, as far as Gothic masterpieces goes, is certainly one of the oldest and arguably one of the most magnificent. So as we look at the church today, we hope that Parisians wake up at least content with the fact that the church has not entirely collapsed and that it still does have a future ahead of it. It's only 856 years old, and we hope that it has many more birthdays coming in its future. So as we await more news of the details on the actual destruction and damage inside, we will all hold our breath to hope that it's not as bad as last night's images of the fire would have suggested. And in the meantime, again, if you're joining us here at CGTN's live stream from Paris on Twitter, Facebook, Weibo, YouTube, or the CGTN app, we thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to have more news for you from Paris in the near future.